Under President Obama's mandate, U.S. troops are now down to about 10,000. They'll be half of that in a year, and in December 2016, the U.S. mission is supposed to be over.
They breed like roaches, and like so many different species of vermin, they will eventually seek common ground. It's happening as we speak among those who will use all the terror that they can muster as their mantra. This while the black hole known as Afghanistan continues to swallow American money and maybe even lives. It's not pretty, but it is what we face every day, whether we like it or not. Welcome back to MidPoint, the man who spent almost 30 years of his life in service to his nation on military active duty, a specialist in developing anti-terrorism. Welcome back, Lieutenant Colonel William Russell. It is also a pleasure to welcome back another proud soldier with nearly 23 years in the Army and 18 as a Green Beret with deployments in South America and the Middle East. Now the counterinsurgency advisor at Concerned Veterans for America, Scott Mann. We thank you both for joining us today.
Thanks, Ed. My pleasure, Ed.
Gentlemen, let's go ahead and start right out with what we are learning new here today, and that is that the different groups, the Boko Harams, ISIS, the rest of them, Al-Qaeda, Taliban, some of them are getting together in Mauritania right now, and they are actually working together, training together. Is it not fair to say, and Lieutenant Colonel William Russell, I'll throw it to you first, that we could have seen this coming? This would absolutely happen because as they grow in their individual strength, they are looking to create an army.
Absolutely. And since we've seeded the battlefield throughout the Middle East, beginning with Iraq, and of course, as you mentioned, our drawdown in Afghanistan, this means that we are leaving, and it just emboldens them to strengthen their efforts, get together, and to pool their strengths so that they can attack any weakness we may show. And as we've seeded the battlefield, we've also seeded that human piece, which I'll leave other gentlemen to speak to, because it's so, it's such a key piece. And when you don't have a presence there, you can't gather the intelligence from that personal face-to-face contact.
All right, Lieutenant Colonel Mann, let me talk to you then about that human, if you will, that human intelligence. It is now out of Yemen, but this is nothing new, Lieutenant Colonel. We have known for years that we in America have been woefully inadequate when it comes to having the proper human intelligence in the Middle East. Certainly countries like Yemen and others, Mauritania, you go ahead and name it. You can name dozens of them right now. How do we then get it back? How do we at least start to gain some of this ground back?
Well, thanks, Ed. I think the first thing is you've got to recognize and call the enemy who he is, which we're not doing right now. I mean, we're still dancing around, the term Islamist violent extremism.
But it's got to be more than that, Lieutenant Colonel, isn't it? Because that's so easy for people to say that we're not saying it out loud. But isn't there more? If you dig down deep, there's something else that's more important than having to worry about a name.
Well, look, where does your tactic and your operational deployment and your footprint and your resources and your authorities come from? It comes from your policy. And if your policy doesn't even acknowledge that you're fighting Islamist extremists, how are you going to put troops on the ground and get intelligence?
Do we really have at this point the will to be able to fight these people, these different groups? Lieutenant Colonel Mann, to you first.
Yeah, I think we do. I think the American people have the will. I question the disposition of this current administration. It certainly doesn't reflect it right now. But I think, by and large, the American people have the will to fight this thing. The question is how we do it. And I think we've got to change how we do that. But it starts with, once again, if you can't acknowledge your enemy and call the enemy who he is and then establish policies and procedures against him, you're never going to beat him.
Here's a very tough question. I've got about a minute left. I'm going to get it to you first. First, I guess, to Lieutenant Colonel William Russell. Let me bring you back into this right now. Do we need to actually get to the point of admitting that we have lost this war as we stand here right now today?
I hesitate to say admitting we've lost war, because you never want to say that, because I remember how devastating
But to ourselves,
it was.
at least, do we need to admit that we've made so many mistakes in the last 10 years when it comes to dealing with these terrorists that as we stand here today with no action, no real foreign policy, we've lost this war?
Well, when it comes to no action, and just as you say, when we're standing doing nothing, far better it is just to get off the playing field, because if you're going to be halfway on with just your toe in, you're going to get your toes smacked. It's, this is if we're going to go in and win, we need to go in full commitment to win it. Never to partly go in and pretend to be in the field when you're not, because that's when you're going to catch that full body block and get yourself knocked out.
Lieutenant Colonel Mann, you agree or disagree with that?
Well, I partially agree. I think that we do have to get serious about it, but the way we've been fighting it for the last 14 years, is not working. There's a better approach to it. We know what some of those approaches are, but we've got to get out of our industrial age mindset and start working from the bottom up and out in these local areas. I absolutely do not think that we call it quits, because this is going to follow us home. Our kids and our freedom depend on our ability to stand up against this threat, and we got to stay in the game. We can't give it up. We've just got to get smarter about how we fight it.
Lieutenant Colonels, both of you please stand by for just a couple of moments. We're going to take a break, come back, and when we do, we'll touch on Afghanistan and more when MidPoint continues. All right, let's get back to work. Returning, retired U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel and anti-terrorism specialist William Russell and the counterinsurgency advisor at Concerned Veterans for America, Lieutenant Colonel Scott Mann. Lieutenant Colonel Mann, I'm going to begin with you on this one because we briefly touched on Afghanistan in a little bit. Just before the break, Afghanistan has been known historically as the place where militaries go to die, where nations basically go and fail miserably. You have the Afghan president who now wants more money. He possibly wants more troops. We're going to keep our troops there longer. How long can we justify staying in a place that has proven that no matter how many people go in, no matter how many militaries are there, it simply cannot be quote-unquote conquered or made civilized?
Yeah, one of my favorite terms is the graveyard of empires, Ed, and you're right on about that. But here's the thing. I remember you're talking to a Green Beret and an advisor, a guy who has spent his whole life in the dark places advising indigenous folks. And in Afghanistan, it took 30 years to break that society down to the level it is right now. It is an important area to violent extremists, and it will continue to be so. We're going to be in Afghanistan for a long time, and we're going to have to work at the local level with tribes and clans that are resisting. It doesn't mean that we need the big 100,000 or even 10,000 person footprint, but Green Beret and other advisors are going to have to be out in those badlands working with tribes.
But no disrespect, Lieutenant Colonel, but you will admit to me that we have heard those lines before, that we have got to be in there, we're going to be in there for a long time, that we've got to work from the ground level up. The American people are going to look at you and me and say, we have heard this for the last 20 years. When are you guys going to get serious?
Well, I think we've been pretty serious. I'm not sure the political leadership's been real serious or given the authorities that we need to get in there and work it. But, it's an ongoing conversation, Ed, with the American people that this is going to take a while to push back against violent extremists in these places. There are no quick fixes. There's no drive-through. We're either going to have to stay in there and work from the bottom up, or we're going to have to pull everybody back and just reap what we sow.
Lieutenant Colonel William Russell, let me throw it to you then when it comes down to the American people right now who have kids who might be 12, 13 years old. Some of them who may have teenagers or early 20s that are serving in the military, even those who have husbands and wives serving there, and those who will be told that we're going to stay in Afghanistan, we have to finish this fight, and your people may die in a land that pretty much has wiped out other militaries over centuries. Do you really think the American people are going to buy it?
Well, part of it is clarifying what the mission is. And if the mission is to go over and, just as Scott pointed out, work from the bottom up, if American people can understand the clear purpose of that engagement, that it's not going in to crush or conquer the land, but rather to work with these various groups, keep a finger on the pulse, accept that there is some danger, and certainly Scott and I have both been in those places where we've accepted that danger, to take those risks, but to keep the American people safe here at home. Because a small presence there, whether we talk about in Iraq or in Afghanistan, would have done wonders to help prevent this re-rise of ISIS.
Couple of minutes we have left here. Let me turn to Yemen very briefly, because now we have absolutely no intelligence on the ground. However, here we're dealing with an American population who pretty much will say, I couldn't find Yemen on a map if you gave me 3 darts and gave me a 1-inch square spot. Most people can't find it. So how do we tell them that this is something that is worth going back into, worth fighting, and we must be there or we are in big trouble? Lieutenant Colonel Russell, to you first.
Well, of course, this is the area there off just off the heel of the Arabian Peninsula and just off the Horn of Africa. And of course, Yemen's where we had the USS Stark that was, I believe it was blown up by a terrorist boat. But being there, being engaged, collecting the intelligence, and keeping a finger on the pulse, as I said, of what's going on will help us avoid many of these threats. And you have to remember that, for example, Osama bin Laden's, a large portion of his family and his roots come from that area as it's seeded over into Saudi Arabia. So this is an area that is a birthplace of terrorism in many ways. We've got to be in there. We've got to collect the intelligence. and be aware of what's going on.
Lieutenant Colonel Mann, one other issue here, too. Iraq is about to request U.S. airstrikes if the coalition accepts it. It would be the biggest collaboration so far against the militants by the Iraqi forces. Do you really think it'll work?
Well, I'm not a fan of this plan because I think what we're, once again, we're playing into the narrative that the folks over there want us to be, which is we'll be the Shia Air Force for the Iraqi Quds forces and the militias that are working in there. That's not the way to play this. Again, we've got to be smarter about how we do it, Ed. It's all about, you talk about intelligence. You have to get into these local areas and you have to work there. We have advisors that are specially trained for this, Green Berets, who right now are not even working with the Sunnis in Iraq. They're working on the bases just with the Shias. We're playing right into the Sunni-Shia narrative. Again, it's about being smarter about it. We should look at how we fought in Colombia, Philippines, El Salvador. These are long-term efforts, but they require a smaller footprint, smaller operational posture. We just have to be smart about it and look at our history. We know how to do this. But right now, this top-down response with hundreds of thousands of troops, it's not getting it done. It's just playing into their narrative.
Intelligence and smart, two words that are in short supply inside the Beltway these days. It certainly seems that way. Lieutenant Colonel Scott Mann, Lieutenant Colonel William Russell, always a pleasure to have you gentlemen. Thanks for joining us.
Pleasure. Thank you.
All right. Those who cannot remember the past condemned to repeat it as the world learned its mistakes and lessons about homegrown terror from Japan. We're back after this.